Welcome, everyone, to the conclusion of the third annual Research and Creative Activities at Appalachian event. This week-long showcase celebrates the research, scholarship, and creative endeavors of our faculty and staff. I am Dr. Heather Hulbert Norris, App State's Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor. I am pleased to introduce Chancellor Sherry Everetts, a longtime advocate and champion for the importance of both research and creative endeavors. In 2019, Chancellor Everetts established the Chancellor's and Provost's Awards for Excellence in Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity. And this afternoon, we will honor the third recipient of each award. Chancellor Everetts created this university-wide recognition to thank our faculty and staff for their work and to show how deeply we value their contributions to our students and to their disciplines. These awards are the first of their kind at App State, and their importance to our academic community cannot be overstated. Since her arrival, Chancellor Everetts has encouraged and empowered our university to prioritize innovative research and learning. Other important examples of this commitment include her creation of the Chancellor's Innovation Scholars Program, which is now in its 5th year and which offers support for selected projects and uplifts our faculty and staff as they pursue innovative research and practice. During Chancellor Everett's leadership, App State has also achieved a tremendous external funding milestone. Last year, the university received more than $37 million in awards for sponsored programs, the highest amount we have ever received in a single year. These funds, awarded by grants and contracts from external sponsors, support the research, development, and programmatic activities of our faculty and staff. Thank you, Chancellor Everetts, for ensuring our App State's important legacy of scholarship and creative endeavors, which contribute to our standing as the premier public undergraduate institution in the Southeast, and which will continue to have lasting and important impacts for generations to come. Now, please welcome Chancellor Sherry Everetts.
Thank you, Provost Norris. You too are a true champion of research and creative endeavors, and we are fortunate to have you at the helm of academics at App State. Thank you also to Etche Keraten and to the Office of Research, the Office of Student Research, University Libraries, and the Center for Academic Excellence. Together, you have presented an extraordinary week-long showcase of vibrant research, scholarship, and creative endeavors. Planning this event is a major undertaking, and you rose to the challenge, making each project and this award ceremony accessible in a virtual format for our entire campus community. Throughout the week, we have seen 27, yes, you heard that correctly, 27 oral presentations, digital posters, artworks, and performances by expert faculty members. Each topic illuminates the diverse and groundbreaking research, creative endeavors, and inquiry taking place at App State each day. Thank you to our presenters for sharing your expertise and your work. There's a reason U.S. News & World Report has repeatedly ranked App State on its most innovative schools list, and that we have been #1 on that list for 2 years running. Our university is committed to excellence in teaching, primary facets of which are research and creative endeavors, specifically when conducted in concert with undergraduate and graduate students. The Appalachian experience is elevated when students have opportunities to contribute to real-world inquiries with our expert faculty and staff. In a few moments, Provost Norris will announce this year's recipients of the Chancellor's and Provost's Awards for Excellence in Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity. And I'm incredibly proud these awards are now in their 3rd year and that our students have so many opportunities to learn from such consummate professionals. Thank you again to everyone who is tuning in today and to those who joined throughout the week. The contributions of App State's faculty and staff are helping shape a bright future for our university and for communities around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Everett. Now I am pleased to introduce to you the awardees for this year's Chancellor's and Provost's Awards for Excellence in Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity. The recipient of the Provost's Award for Excellence in Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity is Joseph Bathanti, Professor of English and the McFarland Family Distinguished Professor in Interdisciplinary Education at the Watauga Residential College. Professor Bathanti has been recognized for his scholarship numerous times. Most notably, he is the 7th North Carolina Poet Laureate and winner of the Order of the Longleaf Pine, North Carolina's highest civilian honor for service to the state. He has received the Roanoke Chowan Award in 2010 and 2014, given annually for the best book of poetry by a North Carolinian, and the Linda Flowers Prize from the North Carolina Humanities Council. Professor Bathanti is a co-founder of the Charles George VA Medical Center's Creative Writing Program. He has a long-standing relationship with veteran writers groups and has a strong commitment to working with individuals to use writing as a means of navigating trauma and difficult memories. A nominator wrote, "Professor Bathanti is not merely prolific and greatly talented. His publications and advocacy for literature and social justice have mattered." Another nominator wrote, "As an internationally renowned poet, novelist, playwright, essayist, memoirist, editor, and scholar, he represents Appalachian State at its very best." Please join me in congratulating Mr. Joseph Bathanti.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Provost Norris, and thank you so much, Chancellor Everett. Great thanks to the wonderful Office of Research. This is quite an honor. What I thought I would do is read a few poems. So I wanted to start that off by saying that all of my grandparents came to the United States in the first couple of decades of the 20th century, 3 from Italy, 1 from France. My mom and dad, my dad was a steel worker, my mother was a seamstress. I'm first generation college, so I never take these kinds of things for granted. And I also wanted to mention that I wanted to dedicate the poems I read today, certainly to my mom and dad, who were, end up being ultimately my heroes. They dreamt for me before I could dream for myself. And the kind of sacrifice that went into the fact that I'm here addressing you today is just really unfathomable. But I also wanted to dedicate it to my colleagues here, the other teachers at Appalachian State that work so hard for this institution, and for our students, because they love our students. This first poem is called Knocked, and I don't think this is the only one that I might gloss a little. The others are kind of self-contained, and I feel like they explain what they're about. I just wanted to mention the title. Again, it's Knocked, and my dad would say sometimes, "That guy has it knocked," which is the same as "that guy has it made." Knocked. I was 17 before I saw Edgar Thompson, the steel mill where my father had worked since he was 17. And only then because I needed his car for the senior after prom picnic. The theme was Color My World. Sleepless, having danced all night, a furnace of cheap champagne, and still in my tuxedo, I dropped him off at 7 a.m. in Braddock, named for a Revolutionary War general, 3 bars in every block, streetlights turned on in the afternoon so the school kids could see their ways home through the ore dust. The mill was blue and corrugated, rising in shaft after shaft of smoke that sawtoothed into gray sky so that I never saw its top. The men in the boom crane cabs wore hard hats and drank coffee. They had it knocked, my father said, but not him. He had to climb the backs of those monsters. When I was little and insisted I wanted to be like him and work in the mill, he'd snap, "No, you're not. You're going to college." In a few months, I really would be going to college. Working in a steel mill was the last thing I wanted to do. My father eased out of the car, handed me a 20, told me to be careful, pinned on his millwright's badge, and filed into the smoke with the others. I turned up the radio, dropped the engine into low for torque, and floored it, sure that in one night I'd had more fun, more love, more everything than he had had in his life. And I wanted to get back to it as fast as I could. So I mentioned that my mom was a seamstress. So she worked in tailor shops, in men's stores in downtown Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And this poem is called Brooks Brothers Shirts. She worked in Brooks Brothers and got really amazing clothes for amazing expensive clothes for on discount, so that and I'm wearing one of those shirts she bought me, as a matter of fact, today. 10 hours a day, my mother hunched downtown in Brooks Brothers tailor shop, fretting cuffs and belt loops, pleats, vents, buttonholes, lapels into ruthless wool suits, unthinkably expensive for men who spent their days unsoiled, whose soft hands never raised a callus. After she punched out, caught the streetcar and high-heeled home 2 icy downhill blocks from the Callow Hill stop, she often breezed in with packages. Icy broadcloth shirts she had monogrammed with my initials, swathed in smoky, silvery tissue. The deep navy boxes piped in gold, the gold band that bound them, and in their centers, the Brooks Brothers coat of arms, a golden U lowered on a sling into a sacrificial grail, the Agnus Dei. My mother dressed me like a prince. Apparel oft proclaims the man I'd one day read in Hamlet. Those luscious shirts, the forbidden glory of plenty, of too much really. Every day with neckties and blazers, oxblood, penny loafers, the Princeton wave that swooped my yearning brow. I wore them to school, yellow, blue, pink, charcoal, and burgundy, pinstripe, tattersall, blinding, ecclesiastical white. I wore them to church. I adored those shirts, my immaculate patrician destiny. My mother washed them by hand, hung to dry in the winter sun, spritzed with water from an Iron City pony, then shelved them in plastic bags overnight in the freezer. She loved them as much as I did. My father, a steel worker, a crane climber, he loved them too. He didn't want me to get my hands dirty. He wanted me to work for myself. My mother ironed in the cellar where my father shaved out of an enamel basin with hot water from the wash tub, a small mirror on a nail pounded into the block wall he whitewashed every year. On his workbench, she stationed a sleeve board for the long tedium of the crease, true as a plumb line, dabs of starch at the collar and cuff, shots of steam from the iron's black button. Mother's needle hand steered the hissing wedge just shy of scorching the frozen fabric, which is the charm. My shirts were sharp enough to bring blood. Monday through Friday, school, then Sunday, high mass. The shirts awaited me, dangling on hangers from the cellar's copper ceiling pikes. The 6 of them in a skirmish, nudging one another in the darkness, complicit in my certain future, swaying slightly like a slow dance in the heat vent's tepid whisper. At their throats, the oval writ, Brooks Brothers makers, established 1818. This next poem is called No Use Kicking. Something else my dad would say. I would say, "Hey, Dad, how's it going?" He'd say, "No use kicking." So, no use kicking. Each night over supper, in the house on Mellon, I learned from my parents what work is. Our street was named for one of the families that owned Pittsburgh. Even a cathedral in East Liberty, Andrew Mellon and his big white mustache peered from the purple 3-cent stamp. The Mellon Street house was the only house my parents ever purchased in 1964 for $12,000 after living as newlyweds with Aunt Lou and Uncle Artie, then renting their first 17 years of marriage. They had $1.50 between them when they left the lawyer at closing. Still deranged by the Depression, they whispered the war as if it had been yesterday, though the new war brewed in the Gulf of Tonkin and goggled. Barry Goldwater gaped like a madman from our zenith. We were Democrats, Unionists, United Steelworkers, Garment Workers of America. My mother, still in her pretty cream blouse with the jabot jade pin in its floret knot at her throat to hide the thyroid scar, railed against the Gavone tailors and pressers like Ziggy Barone, slicker, dandy, his baston and silk scarf greenhorn, knocking down, writing numbers, bootlegging with the hophead porters and will call, while she and Fausta Noche, Chicky Scarano, Elsie Sestra, all those girls hunched like Straccion, treated like Bhutan in rows of pounding secondhand singers in Sears and Roebuck's cellar sweatshop. My father had already cleaned up in the basement from his fiery world on the open hearth. Heats, ladles, Bessemers, blast furnaces, pig iron, coke, slag, ore, melts, and washed his work fatigues in the hand crank Ringer Speed Queen. His asbestos jumpsuit choked from a copper pipe. He smiled and whistled smoke from his Camel toward my mother, asleep on her arms at her end of the table. No use kicking, he liked to say. Faccia content, fall to your knees, make the face of contentment. I said to myself, this is what work is. Busting your ass, eating shit, punching in, punching out, grudging breaks, permission to piss, kissing someone's ass every minute. Foreman, straw bosses, scabs, insult, injury, at best boring, cruel. Fatica, so bewildering it stills your soul, but never, God help you, breach a picket. I always like to say that my sister and I knew never to cross a picket line before we could even talk. This one's called The Strike Baby. In the way I've written it, it comes off as if it's about me, but it's really about my sister. But I had no real craft strategy to make that happen. So I've usurped my sister, what is really something that happened to my dear sister. But I wanted to say that one time I was talking to my mom on the telephone, and she just said this, what you're about to hear. And I was just writing furiously because she was telling this great story about my sister's birth in 1950. The strike baby. $11 a week, unemployment, and I wasn't getting pregnant. When I did, your father went on strike. We were renting from Nick and Ida Santilli. They said, forget about the rent until the baby comes. You were due. Your father was on strike. Then winter came. My God, the snow, the 1950 snow. Everybody called it the big snow. I baked bread. We bought produce from the huckster. Daddy painted Abe and Lena Vento's house. They bought us a crib, so we asked them to be godparents. The days Daddy got paid, he brought home a 20-cent pie. It cost $110 to have a baby. 9 months care and delivery, calcium and vitamin pills. 2 days after you were born, the strike ended. This next poem is called Basic Oxygen. My dad in his job in the steel mill worked in the basic oxygen plant, also known as the BOP shop. And it's a steelmaking method in which pure oxygen is blown into a bath of molten blast furnace, iron and scrap, and the oxygen initiates a process to create a certain kind of melt. Basic oxygen. My father left me his hard hat and silver belt buckle, BOP, the bop shop in relief against the blue field, his union and social security cards, a Polaroid of his retirement party in the maintenance shack, a dingy block pillbox with a coffee urn, caged bar of fluorescent lights, and a wall clock, 3 p.m., straight up. He slices a sheet cake, a frosted crucible of white heat, torrents of smoke and fire, barges scudding coal up the swollen Ohio, bridges like phosphorescent necklaces draping black water, Joe ladled beneath a chocolate blast furnace. He and his smiling comrades wear asbestos and safety goggles, their living names and phone numbers blowtorched into my father's cuneiform, into the tiny brown notebook he carried, also left to me, but never wrote in, not like we say wrote in. No leisure introspection, my father's mood, slant of light, cast of sky, how he felt. I wonder if anyone ever asked him how he felt. He would have answered with a smooth claws of smoke from his camel. What does that have to do with anything? He had to punch in, make time, make a buck. He wore a watch to avoid being docked. He married Rose. They had 2 kids, a roof, milk, bread, shoes. My father had plenty to write about. Domenica, Giuseppe, immigrant familia, Manfredonia, Puglia, mother dead, childbirth, 1920, 5 years old, rake hell, blacksmith, father, 7 brothers, sisters, abandoned, mauled by dog, hungry, stole pie, Thornhill, quit school, depression, war, dead man shift, strikes, layoffs, moonlighting. What else was there to say? Why put it on paper? He didn't have all day. He made steel, direct, paratactic, nouns, verbs, urgent syntax, all caps, exclusively graphite, code more than alphabet, slashes, circles, glyphs, rebar, slag, and ingots soldered into syllables, essential names and numbers, the ghosts of millwrights murmuring in brackish carp water, lapping broken glass, rusty pylons. And that last note on the notebook's final 3 lines, 2 50s tucked between the pages. Don't feel bad, a little something, lots love, Dad. Thanks very much. And again, my great thanks to the Provost and the Chancellor and the Office of Research and my intrepid colleagues across this campus. This is a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for sharing your meaningful and moving poetry. The recipient of the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity is Dr. Andy Heckert. Dr. Heckert is a professor in the Department of Geological and Environmental Sciences and the director of Appalachian State University's McKinney Geology Teaching Museum. Dr. Heckert is one of the world's leading experts in Triassic vertebrate paleontology. He conducts research on the fossil record, focusing on vertebrates from the Triassic period, especially those that lived around 225 to 200 million years ago. The monograph based on his dissertation is the primary reference for Upper Triassic microvertebrate assemblages of the American Southwest. Dr. Heckert joined Appalachian State University in 2005, and since then has mentored over 50 undergraduate research students. Dr. Heckert is the recipient of numerous awards, including Appalachian State University's 2015 Donald W. Sink Outstanding Scholar Award, the 2017 Undergraduate Research Mentorship Experience Award, and the 2011 North Carolina Science Teachers Association Outstanding Earth Science Teacher Award. The award committee shared Dr. Heckert's long-term and sustained nature of research productivity and the experimental work conducted with undergraduate students is a particular area for praise. One of his references wrote, quote, Andy Heckert's scholarly productivity and the quality of his research put him in the top ranks of vertebrate paleontologists internationally. Quite fittingly, Dr. Heckert is spending the fall semester at the DST-NRF Center of Excellence in Paleoscience at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, as a Fulbright scholar. And currently, he is doing fieldwork and will not be able to join us in real time. However, he has recorded his presentation, which we will share with you now. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Andy Heckert.
Greetings from Gondwana. My name is Dr. Andy Heckert, and I am thrilled to accept the Chancellor's Award for Outstanding Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activities. I would love to be there with you guys if we got to do that at all, but right now I am in Gondwana, specifically with Fulbright support. I am living out what paleontologists aspire to do, which is that if the best geologists have seen the most rocks, then the best paleontologists have seen the most fossils. So Fulbright has me here at the Evolutionary Studies Institute at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, where I am looking at some Triassic fossils. As everyone says, but is totally true, there's far too many people to thank. I have a wonderful department. I really appreciate my colleagues nominating me for this award and providing supporting material. I'm hoping that over this talk, you'll get to meet a lot of the people on this acknowledgement slide and or see how their support has been instrumental to helping me have a relatively productive research career. And so we're going to try and dive right into that. So talking about the Triassic here, and basically you might have some basic questions like who's Heckert and what does he do and so on. So I'm a field and a specimen-based vertebrate paleontologist. That is that I love to go out and attempt to find the fossils that I am going to study. I like to collect the specimens and work that way. I'm not so much of a modeler, say. The rocks I work on are Triassic in age. Principally, I'm best known for working on rocks about 220 and 200 million years old. I will slum out of the Triassic work in the Jurassic and Cretaceous and younger rocks as well occasionally. I work across Pangea, as you can see right now. So I've had the privilege to do field work on several different continents and museum work in at least that many as well. And I work principally on very small fossils, although a lot of what I've got to show you today is actually larger stuff. And so I consider myself a little bit of an anachronism in that I just love going out in the field. And some of our techniques have not changed in the last 100 years. Others of them are actually much more modern: digital photography, GPS, all sorts of things like that. But that tenotype of me is the Heckert that haunts my gen ed students' dreams. So I got my training first at Denison University, and then I did a lot of work out in New Mexico in the desert Southwest. And that really has helped me because that provided the basis for a lot of field experiences. And those are experiences that I've tried to bring to my students here at Appalachian so that we've done research in the field, we do research in the lab, we do analytics, we present, we publish, and so on. So, what is vertebrate paleontology? Vertebrate paleontology is a quintessentially interdisciplinary science, as sciences were developed over the course of Western history. right? We eventually developed a science of biology and geology really almost synchronously, and paleontology lies right in the nexus of those and the other scientists. It's fundamentally interdisciplinary, and it is therefore a very exciting field to be in, because you have to know your rocks, you have to know your animals, you have to be able to apply a lot of these other techniques. And then, of course, we get to pull in all the other things too, the history, the culture, the philosophy, the fact that the fossils you study, the language they were published in may be determined by what colony those were originally, what European power colonized that country originally. And so it's a really fun, fascinating interdisciplinary field to be in. So you cannot talk about evolution without talking about paleontology, without talking about the fossil record. If we take the idea of Mendelian evolution being a change in the occurrence or frequency of gene occurrence over time, then the fossil record shows you that. We have the phenotypes, we have the expression of the genes of organisms that have lived on this planet for the last several billion years, and we can put them into stratigraphic order. So as early as the 1800s, the fossil record of the American West, people were looking at these fossil mammals, for example, and we knew that animals changed over time. It took another 100 years for the physics to get us the dates on those rocks, but we were able to develop a time scale based simply on the occurrence of fossils in the fossil record. So as we go a little bit backwards to forwards here through the journalistic questions, the why do I study the Triassic? Well, I think it's just a totally fascinating interval here in Earth history at roughly 200 some million years ago. So we have, again, this fossil record, the stratigraphic record of the history of the planet. Most of what you would think of as fossils in the fossil record is really only the last 10% of Earth history. And I would argue, though, that the Triassic is arguably the most interesting 1% of Earth history. And then, of course, I had a little, where did my graphic go? I lost a graphic, so be it. So the first dinosaurs, the first pterosaurs, turtles, frogs, all sorts of animals, these are first show up in the Triassic of, globally. And so if we look at the Triassic, what's going on there? It is the only part of geologic history that is the only geologic period that is bounded by a mass extinction on either side. We have the world's greatest mass extinction, the end Permian extinction, often called the Great Dying. It has a bunch of wonderful names like that, the mother of all mass extinctions. And then we have the end Triassic extinction, which has no cool names associated with it. But these two big extinction events, you see these dips in biodiversity over geologic time here, sort of define the Triassic, and therefore provide us with an option to, an opportunity to really see some innovative things happening in Earth history. You compare these are major extinction events. This one over here is, of course, the one that killed off the dinosaurs. But you see how the Permian and the Triassic actually, as a percentage-wise, take out a bigger chunk of the biosphere. So the kinds of places I've been here are all indicated in stars. Triassic is the time of Pangaea. We have the southern supercontinent Gondwana is still welded to the northern supercontinent of Laurasia. And so during the Triassic, organisms could literally walk from one end of the earth to the other. And they're very much interconnected. And in fact, some of the fossils I study, an interesting group of reptiles called aedosaurs, do in fact live globally all across the global supercontinent of Pangaea. They can be found in many different countries where there are now rocks of Triassic age exposed. And I've gotten to work on several of those, publish on several of those. And because people care about these kinds of things, the genera that I've circled up there, those are taxa where I've actually been able to name one or more aedosaur species from the rocks around here in the Triassic world. So, and of course, this map is older. This is from 2013, and so it does not include our very own Gorgetosuchus pekinensis. So if you wonder what an aedosaur is, you can go on down to the rock garden. It is open 24/7, 365. And thanks to Lauren Waterworth, Travis Donovan, and some other colleagues, we now have a bronze model of an aedosaur. This was a specimen found in North Carolina that I was on the team that helped to describe. So how did that come to pass? Fair question. When I arrived in North Carolina, the curator at the North Carolina Museum, Vince Schneider, invited me down, and among other fossils, he showed me this kind of football-sized ball of specimen down here, which was a bunch of disarticulated armor. I told him, well, that's cool. You have a bunch of tail armor of an aedosaur. And every time I visited the museum, they had prepared the fossil a little more, extracted a little more bone and out of the rock. And eventually they had extracted about 20 or so of these osteoderms, and we realized it wasn't the tail, it was actually the neck. And that what we had was these 20-ish osteoderms, and that they were distinct from any other aedosaur that we had previously seen. So we were able to name it Gorgetosuchus pekinensis. The name means the neck-armored crocodile from the Pekin Formation. This is not a dinosaur. It is an animal that is more closely related to modern-day crocodiles. But we could tell from the armor that it would have been a very spiny animal such as this. And therefore, we were able to publish it in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology in 2015. And this brings up one of the points I really want to make about when you do specimen-based research. If you're doing research where you're trying to collect the fossils in the field, these being a few of the publications that helped me get tenure here at Appalachian, then necessarily this is discovery driven. It's really actually can be incredibly stochastic. So co-author Larry Reinhardt here found a little tiny lizard jaw that fits on a SEM stub that's maybe half an inch across, 12 millimeter stub, I believe. And that was one little chip off of an 18,000 pound quarry block, but he found the thing. Same where we just picked up a citation on this paper the other day. This skull of Trilophosaurus was found by Bob Kale when he was coming back from a 24-hour gig where he was mudlogging on an oil rig in West Texas, but he'd seen this outcrop of Triassic rocks, and he decided to stop at it on the way back and realized it was loaded with fossils, and eventually donated those fossils to us. And then one of my favorites actually is this tooth, which kind of looks superficially like a Tyrannosaur tooth. But this is Triassic. It's not a Tyrannosaur. It's a much older animal, and it's pathological. It's got these extra, oh no, carinae on it. That means basically extra serrations. And so the cool thing about this fossil was my dad found it while he was helping me with my master's thesis. He was doing some field work with me, and it was about 10 pieces. I glued it back together. Years later, I got a biologist interested in it, and we described the thing. Okay, so one of the points of my research career is that you jump on opportunities as they present themselves, and you keep things like this weird pathological tooth in the back of your mind, and never knowing when you might get somebody who's interested in it. So that brings us to Triassic Trips. So every year since I've been here, with the exception of 2020, I have taken students out west on a 2-week field and museum course where we have excavated fossils, usually from Triassic rocks. And for several years, we went to a place called the Placerius Quarry and the Downs Quarry. These are incredibly rich fossil localities in east central Arizona. So here are a variety of the participants of those digs over the various years. We collected thousands of bones for the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, but just a few of them turned out to be particularly important. And this was really exciting in part because these quarries were first collected in the 1930s. They were discovered in the 1920s, collected in the 1930s, collected again in the 70s and 80s. And yet, if you just keep going back, you eventually find new fossils. So here's the group, again, some of the group working hard at the various sites. And actually, at the initial recap, we had a poster on some of these fossils. So we have this very short-faced jaw that only has a handful of teeth in it, which is very strange for the Triassic because most animals have gone in for having lots of teeth. And then there are a few animals that have gone in for no teeth, but having just a handful of teeth is extremely unusual in the Triassic. And this is a very short-faced animal. This jaw is actually on my screen is almost life-size. It's just hand-sized, basically. And let's see if we can get something really techie to work here. So Brian Zimmer, also in my department, has picked up photogrammetry here. And so he and some students made wonderful 3D photogrammetric models of this specimen so that we can share with authors and other people interested in it. We have 4 different jaws, 2 of them lefts, 2 of them rights. They're very interestingly shaped. And so I was able to work with some collaborators, well, former student Devin Hoffman and some other collaborators at Virginia Tech. And we're going to give it the slow roll again. So just because it is so cool that you can do these kind of high-tech endeavors with a fossil as well. But the long and short of it is that we were able to name this fossil. It came out earlier this year. And we think the animal might have looked something like this. This is Matt Selesky's reconstruction of the animal. And you can actually, if you Google Syntome prosopis, which of course everybody can spell right off the top of their head, if you Google that animal, that article is open access now because of some support from Arts and Sciences, et cetera. And now I'm going to have to move myself around a little bit. So the research I'm actually engaged with right now and research that I've been doing ever since my PhD has been principally in what are called microvertebrates. And very briefly, the way you collect microvertebrates is you see some small fossils or maybe some coprolites, which are fossil feces, and those often have small fossils in them. But basically, you see some very small fossils on an outcrop in the field. You collect those fossils, you haul a lot of rock back because you can't really see the fossils as well as you'd like. But if you haul a lot of rock back, you can soak it and put it through nested sieves. And then what you do is you encourage large numbers of undergraduates to come and pick through the residuum of whatever's stuck in the screens after you've rinsed out the sediment. You try to get rid of 90% or more of the sediment. And you try to get a bunch of students to come in on Friday afternoons. We do finding fossils on Friday. And now all of these students actually most of them have multiple degrees now, but they started their work, their research in part by picking tiny little fossils out of that concentrate. And then we have a variety of tools. We have the scanning electron microscope at the College of Arts and Sciences microscopy facility. We have this, which is a Keynes 3D microscope that's now housed over in the Paleontological Undergraduate Research Laboratory. And students can learn a little bit about every stage of the process from the field through picking the lab, analyzing these fossils, and eventually presenting, and in some cases publishing about those fossils. And so just as a brief example of these kinds of projects, okay, I work principally on archosaurs. That is, I'm interested in the origins of dinosaurs. And the extant archosaurs are either the crocodiles, which actually have gone on to have extremely simple dentitions. They don't actually do very complicated things with their teeth. And the other extant archosaurs are birds, which of course are toothless. At least all extant birds are toothless. And so that causes a problem when the primary fossils we have of these animals in the center of the screen are these serrated teeth, such as this. So when we find all these different teeth, one wonders, well, how much actual diversity does this diversity of tooth form and shape describe? And this is a question that we work with routinely. Several of my students are now engaged in figuring this out with other animals, or in doing this as post-undergraduate studies. I'm thinking particularly Devin Hoffman up at Virginia Tech. We have, of course, a large number of ways that we can describe these specimens. I'm just going to show you one simple one because it's pretty cool. We had this tooth, which we eventually were able to name Wachitodon schneideri. It was the second species. Somebody else came up with Wachitodon schneideri. It's a Native American god, basically. Is what the Wachita tooth is. And then we named it after Vince Schneider. These teeth actually have a venom groove in it, and in places it's completely encapsulated. Okay, so this is a Triassic Archosauriform reptile. This is something that's more distantly related to crocodiles and birds than it is, or it's more closely related to crocodiles and birds than it is to snakes. It is not at all closely related to snakes, we don't believe. And yet it was a venomous animal, as you can see with these venom canals in it. So John Mitchell was able to turn that into a publication. And we continue to do this today. So even here during a pandemic, finding fossils on Friday is a real thing. It's going on even as I am gone. I have very talented students, you see them here, who are leading Finding Fossils on Friday in the Pearl, which is the Paleontological Undergraduate Research Laboratory. And we have an incredibly important site there, this Garita Creek microvertebrate locality. We literally have actually probably 100,000 fossils just from that site. So that brings me to another point that I really want to emphasize is that I've had a lot of great students. I have a great department, and these students have really worked hard and they have built up something. I emphasize peer teaching, Finding Fossils on Friday. I have upper level students guiding, supervising projects that undergraduates or underclassmen are learning the ropes on. And then as those underclassmen develop more skills, then eventually they take over a project. And so with a lot of university support, I was able to get a bunch of these guys out to Calgary for the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meeting in 2017. And I just want to point out that at that time, Jared and Haviv had just graduated from App. They were doing graduate work in Alberta and then down in Raleigh. But I mean, this crew of students right here now has gone on to just this batch. They have, I believe, let's see, 2 master's degrees, another one pending. 4 of them are actually in PhD school right now, 3 master's degrees, 4 of them are in PhD school. Devin went straight into PhD school. And Austin and Jenelise are active in industry here in North Carolina. So we've had a lot of success with these guys, and they're going on to make me very proud. And one of the other cool things that did come out of the pandemic is I started having research group meetings on Zoom. And we realized that, hey, if you're going to do that, then you can have the alumni come in too. So about once a month, I still have a research group meeting where these and some of my earlier alumni come, and we're all on Zoom and we're mingling with the current students. So that's a little bit about my research. Like I say, I am thrilled to accept this award. I certainly hope I'm not done doing research yet. I hope you've gotten the feeling from this that, hey, that Triassic interval of time, I mean, that's a really interesting 1% of Earth history. I mean, that's when things are starting out. It's getting excited. And what we've got now is an opportunity to really continue to build on our understanding of Triassic diversity. And there's lots of students involved with this here at Appalachian, and you can be proud of what they're doing. And so in conclusion here, I think we have just one more thing. Like I said, the Pearl is actively involved in finding fossils even now. I can zoom in with them from South Africa. It's a little late here when I do that. But I've got students still actively engaged in research even as we speak. thank you very much. I hope this conveyed some of my excitement for research and for this award. And I look forward to sharing with you guys some insights from my Fulbright here in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr. Heckert and Professor Bathanti, for sharing your work with us today. And congratulations again on receiving these prestigious awards. This concludes the award ceremony and the week-long events for the third annual Research and Creative Activity at App Celebration. Throughout the week, we had 27 excellent contributions by faculty and staff representing 17 different departments and units. All of the oral presentations, digital posters, artwork, and performances are archived and can be accessed from the Office of Research website. I'd like to thank Chancellor Everett and Provost Norris for joining us today and for their continued support for this event. And thank you to the award committee, the organizing committee, our presenters throughout the week, session moderators, and attendees. We wish you success in your scholarly and creative endeavors this year and hope to see you next year in the 4th annual Research and Creative Activity Celebration.